All right, so welcome to our webinar. My name is Sue. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We are talking about positive strengths-based leadership, and I am joined by Ben. So I'll give you a moment, Ben, to introduce yourself now we've kicked off.
Yeah, hi everyone. Ben Smit here. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Teamgage. It's wonderful to be with you all today to talk about this subject, which is near and dear to my heart. So I guess just as a bit of background for those of you who don't know about us, we work with some fairly large organisations around the engagement of their teams, particularly around that continuous improvement cycle. So, working with them on collecting feedback, figuring out what's important to their strategy and to their team's performance, getting rid of those blockages that are getting in people's way, and really working on getting bit by bit better rather than trying to do these big bang approaches. And here we work with a number of clients in many different industries to help make that happen. So I guess, today I'm going to bring some perspective of some things that we've learned from our interactions with clients, and I guess just some other lessons that I've picked up along the way as well.
Thank you, Ben. Wonderful. And thank you all for continuing to join. We've got quite a lot of people still jumping on, which is amazing. So what are we here to talk about? Well, hopefully you know, because you did register for this webinar. So it's all about the focus on positive leadership, creating a positive culture. And what do we mean by that positive leadership approach? And some of you I know are familiar because Jennifer, I was only with you this morning. So at the Langley Group, many of you know our approach is on the practical application of these three sciences. So the science of emotional intelligence, the science of positive psychology, and neuroscience. And what we try and do is we take the science and the research and make it practical and real. And many of you who know the area of positive psychology in particular, you may know of the idea of positive organisational scholarship, which is basically how do we as organisations, and that includes positive leadership, how do we as organisations really create environments that flourish? And again, I always like to put my quote up here at the moment. I've been saying this for years, but it's become even more relevant right now with the whole COVID situation. Positive psychology, wonderful on the good days, essential on the bad. And I think it's really important that if we've got these things in place, whether it's as an individual, a team, or an organization, we can handle adversity when it hits. And that's the real interesting thing is when everything's going smoothly in your organization or for you in your life, maybe you don't think about these things. But if we've got these things in place, if we're doing these strategies every single day, when adversity hits, we can handle it. And that's probably been something that's helped a lot of people right now with this COVID situation as well. So let's get stuck in. And yes, Julie, the slides, we can make them available. So I'd love you just to think for a moment in your business, whether it's you as an individual or whether your business is a multi-million-dollar global organization. I'd love you to just think about what gives you your competitive advantage. And just share with me in chat, what do you think? What is it that gives you that competitive advantage? Because I want to make this interactive, not just me talking to you. So just think about your business. Oh, creativity, I love that. Great people, thank you, Jackie. Yeah, culture. Okay, so we've got a few people thinking about themselves, absolutely. Positive attitude, our people, customer focus. Yeah. Okay, oh, some great ones coming through. Effective relationships, yeah. Legacy and culture, yeah, flexibility, connection, some great ones. Thank you. And I know they're all coming through to me. You can either set it to be all panelists or all panelists and attendees. That's up to you. Service of others, I like that one. Social intelligence, willingness to serve, because I'm mostly positive. It gives me an openness and flexibility. Great example. It's interesting, and thank you for all of those that are coming through. It's fabulous, and it's great to see some very familiar names. One of the things that often people talk about is the people. And whether you actually mentioned people or whether you mentioned adaptability or flexibility or integrity, guess what? The people doing that are the people. It's not an organization that has integrity. It's actually the people within the organization. As far as service, Ivana, great to have you on. We know that it's people that create good service. So it's really interesting. And we know this, we know we need to look after our people. And it's interesting for me right now, a lot of people had wellbeing on their agenda before COVID. Sometimes maybe it was a bit of a tick box exercise, but maybe now we've got more serious about this sort of thing, which is wonderful. So when we think about what makes people great, there is all sorts of things then that contribute to that. Of course, many things to do with the systems and processes, etc. And we're going to get more into that. But I suppose I'd also like you to think right now is, what is the best thing about your organisation? I'm using this to link into our Positive Organisational Scholarship and Positive Leadership theme. Think about the best thing about your organisation. What makes you unique? What makes you special? Is it the same sort of thing, having a great safety record? Yes, and I was actually up late last night or the night before doing a session on safety. Really care about the employee wellness, absolutely. And the people again, the diversity, brilliant, I love that. Engagement, and again, I love that, Dadek, you've said about engagement, because I always say you can't have engagement without emotions. People forget that bit. Culture and values walks the talk. Thanks, Jennifer. I'd agree with you on that one. Brilliant, okay. The reason I've asked you to just think about that is each organisation will be different. Each organisation has wonderful things that make it great, and it will be different from different organisations. What I'd like you to think about is this focus on the positive. Why do we focus on this? So in our organisation, everything we do is focused on positive psychology, positive leadership, appreciative inquiry, pulling towards what's great. So I'd like you to imagine that this graph here represents a particular analysis of your organisation. Could be anything, how you're perceived in the marketplace, anything, whatever you like, those 5 dimensions are. This is a graph that represents your organisation. Then I'd like you to imagine that the purple line is the average of your competitors. So averaging it out, you will see there that in the first dimension, if you like, whatever that might be, and the 4th and the 5th, you're doing better than your competitors. But in the 2nd and the 3rd, you're doing worse than your competitors. What we normally do from an organisational perspective is we normally go, okay, well, let's fill this little gap. But what I'd like you to think about is, if you fill that gap, if you start to get better at the things that you are not so good at, all that happens is you reach the line, as in you've become the average of your competitors. The whole positive psychology side of things says, well, let's imagine another option. Let's imagine this is the same, and I've had to increase the graph a little bit, but let's imagine that instead of focusing on what you're not doing so well, you actually build on the things you are doing so well. Let's imagine that the thing that makes you amazing, you get even more amazing at, that you strip well ahead of your competitors. What you might find is the piece where you weren't so good possibly becomes less relevant because you've already cornered the market in the area that you are unique. And, you know, I'm in the middle with a group of people at the moment. We're running a coaching program with the fabulous Robert Biswas-Dina. And when you think about individual coaches, each individual coach has something that makes them special and them unique. For an individual person to decide, oh, I need to do more of that because person X is better at that than I am, maybe they're losing track of the thing that makes them special and appealing to their clients. And that's the same whether you're an individual coach or whether it's the same as if you're in an organization. So that's the perspective, is how can you pull towards what's possible? And now I'm going to show you a slide that has the most words on it. So I never usually put many words on a slide, but I'd like you to really read this. So I love the fact that this starts with imagine. Now, I'd love you to just share with me in chat if you have any thoughts about what do you think of this? Thank you, Rebecca. I'm glad you have that book. What do you think about this? Is it possible? Positive deviance rocks. I agree, Laura. But is it possible that we could have organizations that create abundance and well-being? Future perfect, yeah. And thank you, Avril. I sometimes get, oh yeah, fat chance, but Avril says it's totally, of course it's possible. Well, this is what many of us are striving towards. And absolutely, Lynn, wouldn't the world be a better place? And we're not saying we have to be perfect all the time, but yeah, I think some of these things, trying to get them all 100% of the time may be difficult, but yeah, collective effort. Thank you. And thank you, Faye. You like the phrase key indicators of success. Yeah, rather than trying to fix what's wrong with us all the time. Thriving humanity, Maha, what a great phrase. Thank you. And thank you, Carly. I love your comment there, something to aspire to. And even if you don't think this is entirely 100% possible, at least it is something to aspire to. And some great comments coming through. Thank you. So why have I started with this? Well, because I want you to think about that this is what positive leadership is all about. Yes, Ivana, thank you. Well, the interesting thing about Ivana, your comment there about the greed and the human emotion, there will always be those elements there. But guess what? When I'm in a negative emotional state is when I'll probably engage in less effective behaviors. If I have higher levels of well-being, I'm generally engaging in more effective behaviors. So I guess if we can lift people as far as their well-being is concerned, maybe we get less of those sorts of things. Okay, so I'm going to share with you this framework, and Ben and I are going to sort of interact a little bit here and think about, well, how do we look at this from a systemic way as well as a leadership way? So this particular framework, just in case you haven't come across it before, many of you may have, many of you may not. This comes from the work of Kim Cameron, who's one of the leaders in the area of positive organisational scholarship. And it's really a quick summary of some of the key things that have been found around what makes a flourishing leader in an organisation and what leadership elements really allow that organisation to flourish and thrive. So you have to remember, positive leadership in this case is looking at what do the best leaders do? What does a +8, +9, +10, if there is one, leader do? And what can we learn from that? So when we think about climate, and I'm picking up on actually, Ivana, your comment here, because that's what climate is all about. Climate is all about fostering a climate where positive emotions predominate over negative emotions. Now that sounds really simple, but to Ivana's point that you just sent through, it needs more emotional awareness. We actually have to be able to have conversations about emotions. My midnight session last night was looking at, well, how do we handle emotions when somebody comes to us and says, I'm having a mental health problem? Do we go, talk to me about it, tell me how we're feeling, etc.? Or do we go, oh, let me see how I can solve that for you? Oh, I remember when I had a mental health problem. We've got to deal with the emotions, absolutely. So Tilly's asked a good question, is climate the same as culture within the workplace? Look, a little bit, but actually there's a couple of other components that will also accumulate what most people traditionally think of as culture, which we'll get to in a moment. So climate is, if you like, the emotional climate where emotions, positive emotions predominate. I'd like you to consider that this probably makes complete sense to you. And I'd also like you to consider that when you look at the research, that is not what is being experienced in most organisations on a day-to-day basis. It's actually not what's being experienced by individuals often on a day-to-day basis. And it's partly linked to how the brain is wired, which is why we often talk about neuroscience, because of course we know that human beings tend to more often complain or whinge or go towards the negative or look at what's wrong, and therefore negative emotions predominate. If you were to walk around an office, chances are you would probably see more negative emotions being expressed than positive, and that has been researched. So although it sounds simple, it's actually sometimes hard to allow people to say, I love my job, I'm enjoying what I do, having a laugh, enjoying some serenity or contentment or getting excited about things. And again, I'm sure this makes complete sense to you that we know when we focus on the positive, it gives life to individuals and organizations. And the reason that I've used the sunflower analogy is because they actually call this the heliotropic effect. The heliotropic effect is when a sunflower moves its face to follow the sun. Any living organism does the same, whether it's the sun or whether it's energy. And if we can tap into that in an organizational perspective, it can really work for us. Now, I haven't got a chance to go into the brain element here, but what I would say is from a leadership perspective, if you want to create the best climate possible, you need to consider, are you fueling your brain on a day-to-day basis and showing up as the best version of you? Not necessarily 100% of the time, I'll give you a bit of leeway, but more frequently as the best version of you. And personally, I think it's really useful to know what's going on in your head, to know when you're not necessarily performing as the best version of you as a leader, so you know the impact that you're having. So creating a climate, the positive climate, is about how do we allow work both within ourselves and the climate we're creating in the team, how do we allow for positive emotions to predominate? And the last thing I'll mention before I hand over to Ben here is, as a leader, according to Gallup, 70% of how employees see the climate of their team is down to you as the leader. Now, bear that in mind. If you are in a leadership role, up to 70% of how your team members perceive the climate of that team is how you show up every day. And is your brain playing at its best? So Ben, over to you. How does this relate to some of the work that you do from a climate perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. And I love what you were saying. But throughout that whole section, it really rings true with the customers we see. I'll talk a lot about contrasts between those that do it right and those that have trouble with it. And I think one of the fundamental aspects of this is setting. You call it culture, but I think it more applies as principles rather than rules. So you've all seen those the ways that rules can be gamified. There's some special on an item, and it's one per order, so people go to the counter, buy one, run back around to the line, and go again, right? And it is a lot the same with work environment. When you start setting these rules that are supposed to keep things in boxes, rather than understanding what the drive is behind them, that's when you can get into a lot of trouble. So if everyone is aligned with the principles of what we're trying to achieve, we're doing this because we want to positively affect the customer's life in some way. That's a far more powerful climate that you can then foster. I think, as I said here, hiring well is probably one of the most crucial things you can do to create the right environment as well. It's certainly in a very diverse way. We want diversity of thought. That's a really huge indicator of a successful environment as well. But finding people that are aligned on the momentum of your core values and your culture, those people that can sit with you and be right there with you, in line with that positive momentum is invaluable. So, we've got a rule here, for example, that if we put a role out that we want to hire, we won't say yes to that person unless we all get up in the morning after having that last interview and are really excited about them getting started. That has to be there, because then we know we've got a great fit. And look, for organizations that are going through a lot of change, this is one of the ways that they tend to do this is, if they've got a problem with their existing environment, they want to keep pummeling that environment with really positive, energetic people that want to move things forwards, and that's infectious as well. So I think that's a really good one to look at. And obviously, we deal a lot with the continuous improvement mindset. And I think, going back to your point at the start, you don't necessarily need to focus on what's wrong, but you can focus on what's right and how to strengthen what's right. So it's really important that, and you alluded to this before, on those good days, you sort of think, oh, well, do we need all of this? But that's exactly when you need it, because you've got something powerful, and let's keep it. So really diving in on that, keep iterating. Let's not get, complacent in what we've built here together, because what we've built here together is a special thing. I think that really works wonders. And look, the last one, I think, again, people have a bit of a false mindset around what failure is. And, there's a lot of organizations which make that a reality, where you fail, that's a negative thing. You're dressed down, you've got, there's problems there. I'd love to see it, and we're starting to see it more and more with customers now, where failure is celebrated, right? We learned something. Okay, this didn't work, but we actually got out there and tried something, and we've learned from it. Let's all celebrate that moment, because that teaches us something, and that allows us to move on to that next step. So if you aren't failing, you really aren't stretching yourself enough. You're not finding that way to learn. which is really important. And I think, looking at all the customers and all the, work environments that I've seen across time, I think it comes down to two types of teams and two types of organizations. There's the one that says, that's the way it's always been when something arises. And then there's the other environment that says, how can we make it better? How can we strengthen it further? That second team is such a magical work environment. And if you find it, you have to hang on to it. And where you can cultivate it, it's really important to do so.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. And I think from everybody, and there's some great comments coming through here, what we know is really interesting is if you have a more positive emotional climate, again, and I agree, Michelle, the word failure, it is absolutely, it's about learning and growth. But guess what? When I've got a more positive emotional state, when I'm not quite there, I'm going to be able to keep going. And again, those of you on this call who know about Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory, that's what we're doing here. We're creating that upward spiral by building on those positive emotions that allow us to learn and grow and develop. Okay, so then I want to have a look at, yes, Melissa, well done. It's good to have you on, Mel. So when we think about positive communication, the name of the theory, Michelle, was broaden and build theory. And any one of my diploma students who are on here will be able to describe in the chat what that is. If people with the comments, if you've got all panelists, by the way, set on your chat, it's only coming through to myself and Ben. If you've got all panelists and attendees as the drop down, it will be so everyone can see. So if you do want everyone to see your comments, then please drop down and change it to all panelists and attendees. Brilliant. All right, so positive communication, what is this? Sometimes people get the wrong impression of what we're talking about with positive communication, and they think it's about being nice all the time. It is not. It is about where affirmative and supportive language replaces negative and critical language. What does that mean? It means if you have some tough feedback to give or a challenging conversation, you do it with compassion. You can still do it with affirmative and supportive language. You can give someone negative feedback, if you like, in a positive way. Equally, you can give people positive feedback in a very negative way. If I say to Ben, oh, great job today on the webinar, in theory, that's positive feedback. But if I'm doing it in a very flippant, oh, thanks, Ben, great. It's kind of like, oh, really? Yeah, thanks. So please don't think of this as about being nice. It's about being able to engage in communication with compassion, with understanding, and being able to have the conversation. And what I mean by this is sometimes what happens for many leaders, and I know myself, I always find this sort of stuff difficult sometimes as well, is somebody makes a stuff up in February. And you feel uncomfortable, you don't know how to tackle it as a leader, so you kind of ignore it. And then you get to November, December, and it's performance review time, and you kind of bring it up and throw it out there in probably a less effective way of explaining why you've marked them down. And you don't mean it in any bad way, perhaps, but it's like, so when we're using positive communication, we're tackling things when they come up. We're able to still try and do it with affirmative and supportive language. And thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that in the chat. Oh, you might need to do that again to all panelists and attendees because other people can't see your comment, my dear. Okay, so what does this mean for you in your organization, whether you're an organization of one, whether you're an organization of lots? Thanks, Jennifer. So I thought I'd share with you this lovely piece of research. And I have a lot of regard for Linda Robson. She did a really cool piece of research where basically she sat in on organizations and teams and meetings going through change. And basically as a researcher, she coded every single comment that was coming out of people's mouths about how they responded. And these were particularly organizations going through change, where people can get particularly stressed, etc. And one of the things she found, I'm sure it won't be a surprise to you, is higher functioning individuals and higher functioning team performance came from increased positive language. Now, what you think about is the ratio. It's called a positive negative ratio. The ratio she found is the highest performing teams had a ratio of 4.32 to 1. She was very precise with her maths. 4.32 to 1, as in positive, affirmative, supportive language comments, responses, compared to negative or critical comments or language. Now, this is really interesting because, again, think about what that really means. Somebody throws out a stupid idea in a meeting. Critical language would be, oh, that won't work. We tried that last year. Positive language would be, well, let's explore how that might work now. Tell me more about how you see that we could improve the approach next time. I think we might need some budget for that. Where are we going to get it from? That's what we mean by this sort of thing. The thing that really struck me, and I was actually at her first presentation of, this was her thesis, her PhD thesis, and it was a massive piece of work. I was actually at a presentation in the US at the Positive Psychology Association conference. And I remember the figure really clearly in my mind. The highest performing team of all of those that she monitored, and there were a lot, there were over 50,000 data points, the highest performing team outperformed the lowest performing team by 1,632%. Her name is Linda Robson, and if you want her piece of research, Julie, just send me an email. You've got it in your inbox. All right, so Ben, throwing back to you, what does this mean as far as you're concerned when it comes to what Teamgage does and communication?
Yeah, look, again, I think this is very tightly coupled with the environment. Communication in functioning environments is really about some openness and transparency, so people know what's going on. People feel free to voice, their individual voices, and I think that comes in tandem when it works well. It comes in tandem with sort of no grudges afterwards, right? People have different opinions on what should be done. We talk a lot about, the best idea should win. And actually some of the best ways to do that is to measure, right? I think, everyone's got an opinion and ideas, and some of them will work and some of them won't. But if we can get to a point where people aren't, holding on to their ideas as a limb that they lose if they don't get picked, it's really more about, we can be open and honest and try something. And then I think this other idea of, disagree and commit. I love this, where you've got to come to a decision at some point, right? You can't do everything that you want to do, and you have to pick a direction. Once we do that, we all get behind it as a team. Even if it wasn't our idea, even if we thought it wouldn't work for whatever reason, now is the time to put your positivity hat and go, well, I'm going to make this work for us because this is the direction we've decided to go on. I think that's really valuable, and you can't contrast that with an environment where someone sort of is taking pot shots at someone else's idea and bringing it down and almost undermining it because the decision's already been made, but I'm not happy about it. That's a really toxic environment. So I think this idea of, look, let's get it out early, let's be really transparent, let's be honest with each other. Now let's commit to a path and go for it. And I think that feeds in nicely to what we call our communication cadence, right? It's one of those things that, again, you're setting that up in your environment where you have those regular touch points to talk about the important things, to make sure that things aren't building up over time, and to be open and honest with each other and encourage each other and reward each other with recognition as well. So, that means a lot of different things to a lot of organizations. We're seeing a lot of the agile methodology coming into organizations now, things around, daily stand-ups, review points, for larger organizations, they'll do their town halls and all that good stuff. But it's really about finding that cadence that works for you and making sure you don't drop it, even if it feels like there wasn't a lot that happened that particular week, right? It's because it's there that you have those opportunities to really, give each other that recognition and work on any issues that you've got. And look, the last point here, over communicate to be understood. I think that's something we don't spend enough time thinking about. Really, as leaders, we need to say the same thing a lot of times before it sinks into everyone, not because people are not listening, it's because there's so much information floating around right now that to break through that and make sure that your principles, right? Going back to that climate where it's not the rules, it's the principles. Why are we doing this? Why is all of this important? Why are we important to each other? Make sure that everyone knows that without any doubt. And you'll see the graph on the right-hand side there is really just talking about that improvement cycle. So, where we feed in, and this is going to look different for every organization or every team and how they work, but certainly the Teamgage philosophy is really about collecting that measurement, that feedback, then reviewing it together, having those discussions, and then putting those actions in place. And the last one's really important, right? Because if you just review something and then don't do anything about it, nothing really changes. So that's really critical, and just feeding back into that next cycle. Yeah, the second graph here as well, I wanted to show everyone this because these are real results, by the way, from a multinational of ours. I can't name them, unfortunately, but I wanted to show you their journey through COVID. So you can see, obviously, there was a big dip in a range of metrics there. We were measuring, you can see their environment, communication, collaboration, and trust. But what I really want to draw your attention to there is this communication metric. It actually wasn't too bad in the first place. They were doing a reasonably good job, but they made a concerted effort to double down on their communication strategy. So, and that's going to mean different things to different organizations. For them, it was, Q&A sessions, virtual town halls, implementing new technologies to allow communication to happen. These stand-ups, they had a tactical response team. It's all about communication. And what you'll see is it's had an obvious effect on those other areas. So being open and honest with the organization, making sure that everyone's okay, getting in touch with them regularly, telling them what's going on in that environment of uncertainty that we all had earlier this year, had a marked effect on their environment and trust scores and collaboration. So it really was that catalyst that the effort they put in, they could then see tangible results at the end of it. So I really love that story.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. There's some great comments coming through that we're not necessarily getting to all of them, but a couple of ones I'll just comment on. So Melissa, yeah, sometimes people are bent on finding the negative, but again, I'd like you to consider if you're in a negative emotional space, you are way more likely to communicate with critiquing and judgment and blaming and those sorts of things than when we're in a positive emotional space. So the climate actually feeds the communication as well, and vice versa. So some great comments coming through. Brilliant, thank you. All right, and I know Ben and I are only touching on these things briefly, and I haven't had a chance to explain all the things around active constructive responding and all these sorts of things when it comes to communication and the really cool theories and applications. Oh, Samantha, good luck. Good luck, my dear. All right, so positive meaning, this is the next component. And again, I think what's really interesting when you look at some of the leading organizations, and not just leading financially, it's about leading with some sense of purpose or meaning. And I really love this piece because when we think about meaning, it's about where people feel like they're engaged in meaningful work and positive outcomes. And this actually will influence the distinction. Somebody asked earlier about the distinction between climate and culture. In this particular framework, climate is that emotional climate that you create. Is it an emotional climate of one of support and trust and openness and those sorts of things where positive emotions can flourish and negative emotions are handled positively? But meaning does tend to link into what we traditionally think of as culture, as in values, how we show up around here, why we show up around here. And I always like to think of meaning as, again, that thing that will pull you through on the bad day. You can be having an awesome week and everything goes great and you don't even think about the meaning behind what you do. But when you are having a rough day, sometimes this is the thing as a leader or an employee that can really pull you through of why do I do what I do? Why am I dragging myself out of bed this morning, even though I don't feel like it? I know there is some sense of meaning or purpose. And I'll share with you an example on this because I did some work for about 10 years for a global organization in software, hardware, that sort of thing. And I ran all their leadership programs across Asia for about 10 years. And I have to admit, I think it was about year 7. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't really know what they did. I know they did hardware, I know they did software, I know they had taglines around various things that they did, but what they actually did, I wasn't really sure. And then we developed a new leadership program for them. And we talked about all this sort of stuff. And one of the things that they had to do was they had to create a video, a 3 to 5 minute video to play on the last day about one key point that they'd learned and bring it to life in the organizational context. And I have to admit, one particular group, I actually had tears in my eyes as I stood there and watched this video because A, I finally got what they did, but B, how they brought it to life just hit people really where it's important, as in meaning. And what it was is that the software that they produced, they actually did this video not about software at all. It wouldn't have resonated with me if they'd have just talked about software. But they had pictures of the bushfires. Now, this was a few years ago down in Victoria. And they had pictures of the bushfires. And they basically told a story that said, due to our software, we shaved 1.27 minutes off the response time of the Victorian Ambulance Service. And because of that, we now save this many more lives. And I'm like, now I know what you do. Now I know why you make a difference. So bear in mind this whole element about meaning. Human beings need meaning. I know, Wendy. It's good to see you back. Hi. So meaning is really critical to us. We make meaning anyway. We will make meaning about, what our boss really means when they said so and so, or when our colleague didn't look up and smile at us. We make meaning anyway. But from a leadership perspective, this can be really critical. And again, when you look at some of the leading organizations, they're very purpose driven. Absolutely. And to your point, Jen, cultivating purpose is a skill for your own well-being, but absolutely can have an influence from organization. It is a game changer. Absolutely. So Ben, over to you from a Teamgage perspective, your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. Look, one of the things we talk about a lot is the continuous improvement cycle, because I think it's something that you can apply to literally every situation, and it provides a lot of value. But one of the components that I really love in that cycle is this idea of ownership. So, it goes from being this very top-down thing where leaders have to give everyone all the answers to the problems that they're facing, to something where you can sprout ideas and improvements from the ground up and give ownership at that team level. And you'll see the difference, right? If you hand someone a task, they'll go and do it, and they might be reasonably happy about it. But if you give them something to truly own and say, look, this is yours, I need your help to go and tackle this, and I know you're capable, it's just a much different approach. And it better still if it's their own idea in the first place. Watch a few people who get really excited about a project come together, and you're just watching magic in action. So I love that idea of just find a way wherever possible to give ownership of the things that everyone's doing within the team. Second point here, perception is a really powerful thing. We can both look at a piece of artwork and I can sort of go, that's all right. And Sue, you might absolutely adore this piece of art. It's the same canvas, it's the same amount of paint, it's the same atoms, but it's our subjective perception of that. And I think that's very true of meaning as well. And importantly, although it may not be an objective reality, it is someone's subjective reality, which to them is no different, right? So that finding that meaning for them, or helping them to find that meaning themselves, very much in line with the mission, vision and values that you've got for your organization. I mean, if you don't have them, it is very difficult to then align to anything tangible. So and I think, that fits into that last section as well. So fit with role. I've seen some really excellent, positive people who don't fit a role, and it's a struggle, and it's hard to get to work, and it's hard to stay at work, and it's hard to think about work. And then you find them that right magical fit, and all of a sudden the world is a completely different place. And going back to, I guess, this perception, I think, an example that many of you may have heard, but you can have a high-flying executive at some company who is just there for the dollars and has a lot of power, but really isn't enjoying what they're doing. And you can contrast that with, say, a janitor who works at a school, who thinks of their job as giving the kids a safe and clean environment for them to learn and grow to become the leaders of the future, right? And that, one of the very different jobs. I think traditionally we've thought of those in very different ways, but how powerful is that second position to be like, I'm doing this to give our leaders of the future an environment where they can thrive. Those people are living much more fulfilling lives than those who don't.
Absolutely, Ben. Thank you. And I love that example. And I know I've met numerous people. I remember meeting somebody very, very senior who was a surgeon in the Navy who said, I have no sense of meaning, fulfillment in what I do. And I'm like, wow, you fix people's lives. He said, I just don't. I don't get a sense of meaning from it. But again, my perception, he's the one living it. So again, sometimes what we assume from the outside is not necessarily what people are experiencing from the inside. And we also know that, as I say, people will make meaning anyway, so we may as well try and make sure that it works, and it works for what we're trying to pull people towards. And I'm going to pick up on one of the things Ben said about fit with role. One of the things we always talk about is role portraits. So some of you know we have a Positive HR toolkit. And in that Positive HR toolkit is a whole bunch of templates and tools around the whole of employee lifecycle. But one of the things when we talk about role portraits is always putting this sense of meaning behind it. So it's not just a job description, as in describing what you do, but it's got a role portrait that taps into what's the sense of meaning and purpose of the role, what are the strengths that you're going to bring to it, and it's sculpted with the person joining that role. So thank you for that, Ben. And no worries if you have had to join late, it's all recorded, so you're all good. All right, so we get to our last piece of the puzzle. This is probably one of my favorite pieces of the puzzle, is about relationships. It's about, are we as leaders creating positive relationships that are a source of enrichment and vitality? And one of the things I think is really important to this, if you look at any of the older traditional engagement surveys, you will know there is always questions about relationships. Do I have a best friend at work? Do I have someone to support me? Do I have someone that cares about my development? There are always questions in the traditional factors around relationships. Many of you in your early comments, when I asked you what was the best thing about your organization, you talked about things to do with relationships, the people that work there. Somebody wrote, the job was pretty ordinary, but the people that I worked with and my boss was fabulous. So again, relationships are critical to us. And I'm sure it won't be a surprise to you to know that from a well-being perspective, human connection is one of the #1 contributors to well-being, no matter what culture. And I think that's really important for us to bear in mind. And it's one of the reasons everybody's concerned more now during COVID, the isolation and the people who are already perhaps more marginalized in society becoming more marginalized, and the risk of mental health. You probably know many people during COVID who are thriving in this environment and loving the working from home and being locked away and doing their own thing. They're building relationships with their families or etc. Or they're finding ways to connect virtually. At the same time, what we also know is many people are not thriving and they're really struggling with being disconnected. And Kirsten, your example about the Harvard longitudinal study, I'm sure people would love that. If you can find the link while we're on, pop it in chat, because it is a great study of people who've been followed for 70 years or something. And absolutely, they are thriving if they've got human connection. So how do we think about that as a way of making sure that we are leveraging this in an organizational setting? And Alison, if you can find the link to that study as well. Alison, good to have you on. Haven't seen you for a while. Yeah, the same as smoking 17 cigarettes a day. That's a really interesting one. So there's a couple of things I want to pick up on relationships. And to me, it's about diversity of thought, diversity of strengths that are being brought to the table. It's about that environment where people can feel like they are trusted and respected, and relationships are important. And one of the things that we often do, and actually I just got off a session with a client around strengths, is how do we bring people's strengths to life so people can really flourish? And some of you may be familiar with this aspect of really playing to people's strengths, really allowing people in your organization to thrive and flourish by using their strengths every day. And it's a really wonderful way of looking at how teams job craft and tweak so that they can get the best out of each other and get the best out of themselves as a team. And I always like to show this particular graph. It's, again, one of my favorites. Those of you who've seen me speak before, you will know that this is one of my favorites. It's a little bit old now, but it was a CLC study, so the Corporate Leadership Council in London, with nearly 20,000 real life people in real life jobs. And it's one of the reasons that I loved it, because it really was people in their role that were In sales, did their sales improve? In customer service, did their customer service improve, etc. And the thing that I think is really important here, and this is linking to that relationship piece, is how people were performance reviewed over the course of a 12-month period. And what they found that was really interesting is some people were reviewed based on performance weaknesses. What does that mean? It basically means when I come into your office, if you're my boss, you say to me, "Hi, Sue, these are your strengths, these are your development opportunities." We call them development opportunities because we don't want to be rude and call them weaknesses. But then we say, let's put some goals in place around your development opportunities. And I spend the next 6 months, 12 months trying to fix my weaknesses. If you've ever had a performance review like that, or if you're still doing performance reviews like that, just bear in mind that led to a drop in performance of 26.8%. That is huge. If we look at the other end of the spectrum and you look across at the orange graph, you'll see some people were reviewed based on performance strengths, which is me coming into your office and you saying, "Hi, Sue, these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses. If we have to get these to a level for you to be competent in your role, we will. But for the next 12 months, I'd love you to spend time setting goals and focusing on your strengths." That led to an increase in performance over time of, oops, my little thingy's gone away, 36.4%. I lost my mouse there, so it ran away. 36.4%. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty amazing. And when you can work with teams together around job crafting, and again, that's another core skill that's come out of Positive Organisational Scholarship, and you can bring strengths into the mix, think about what that could be like for a team. And I know we've got a client we're working with at the moment in Europe who are absolutely rolling out the strengths profile team by team by team. And through all of this COVID and 4 restructures since March, 4 restructures this team has been through since March, they are kicking goals, and it is just so beautiful to see. And thank you, Kirsten, for your great example about your football coach or your son's football coach. Absolutely, that's a perfect example. So the last thing that I'll leave you with, and I won't get into the strength stuff, but if anybody wants to know more, please let me know. And I know many of you on this call are linked to the strengths profile or certified. But I suppose the thing I'd like you to consider is this flips back around to climate, because I'd like you to imagine how it feels if you have to focus on the things you are not good at for 12 months. How does it feel? What emotions are you likely to experience over that 12-month period? Well, think about that for a moment. If I am therefore experiencing frustration, irritation, self-doubt, resentment because I've got to try and fix these things, I'm feeling useless, disengaged, disempowering. If I'm feeling all of those emotions, that is back around to climate, and therefore I'm showing up not as the best version of me. And Laura's asked a really good question. Can there be a focus on both strengths and weaknesses? And in the strengths approach, Laura, there absolutely is. But what you do, you use your strengths to compensate for your weaknesses, or you recognize people are in the wrong role. If you tried to put me in a role that was all about administration, compliance, spreadsheets, etc., I would be in the wrong role, because I have some really cool weaknesses around adherence, and I have some really cool learned behaviors around detail. So it's also about being honest about the role. So one last, actually, I'm going to throw to you, Ben, and then I'm going to do my my little last thing, because I think we're getting a little tight on time. So, Ben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, there's obviously a broad range of topics to discuss under the relationships banner, but for me, these are the ones that we've seen be the most important. You know, the first is what is the role of a team leader or a leader in general, and it's not to be a dictator. That's the sort of number one issue we see is like, all right, I'm in the big chair now. It's time to put out my manifesto and get things done. It's really not that at all. If you think of yourself as the coach of that team, you are the facilitator. So you're unblocking that team into their best potential. So it's working with them. It's understanding what they need. I think that's really, you know, going back to your point of fit for a role, it's understanding where they flourish. But as a team, it's really about how can I get them all to that next level, so that they're hopefully better than you are in almost every area, right? That's the goal of a good coach, is to impart all of your wisdom and do your best to see everyone else flourish. The other one I've seen that is a really big issue, particularly with larger organizations, is that siloing between teams. It's very common. As a company grows, they have a sales department, they have a product department, and they have a manufacturing department or whatever, and one blames the other when something goes wrong, and that's a natural tendency of humans to kind of form those tribes. You must work against that at all costs. And look, this really fits into the agile cycle as well. We were seeing a lot of modern workplaces now move to having teams that work on a problem rather than teams that work in a specific area. So, if you're building a feature for a product, you will have your developers, you're going to have your designers, but you're probably also going to have someone in sales involved, someone in marketing, you're going to have someone maybe from legal to, all work together on this problem, and you split the organization that way. And that's really powerful, because all of a sudden that new tribe is actually cross dimensions. So you remove that silo. I'll leave you to talk more about the strengths profile stuff, but I think how people actually work together and fit together is really crucial. The right fit of people will make a project work so much better. And look, I thought, it's worth talking about trust and how that fits in. That blame game, in those toxic environments, that's really where you start seeing people sweeping their failures under the rug. We talked about failure being an opportunity for learning, and there was a comment there about not even liking the word. But to me, I think we need to take back that word as something that's beneficial to us. It's a opportunity for learning, and so you have to have those relationships where people feel comfortable to go, guess what? I tried something and it didn't work. Let's keep going, right? And if you can create those types of relationship where, again, you're the coach, you're the facilitator, the team knows you've got their back when things like that occur. That environment is a real playground for some positive momentum.
Yeah. Brilliant, Ben. Thank you. And I know Ben and I are rapidly running out of time, and there's some really good questions that have come in. So I will just address a couple, and then I'm going to, Anna, answer one of your questions to wrap up. So a couple of comments, and I totally get this one. One of the questions is, how can we be positive without lacking substance? As an example, my friend says her boss is praising everything and people feel like kindergarten children. And I think that's really interesting. And again, that authenticity needs to come through, and it links to communication. Because we can be positive and we can praise, and we have to deal with some of the challenges. And I remember, Joe, you won't be able to see all the questions if they're just coming through to me. If you change it to all panelists and attendees, then you can. So the answer to that question, as I say, I worked with a not-for-profit a while ago, and one of the things that was challenging is they sort of embedded a really positive culture, but it morphed a little bit off kilter, in the fact that nobody was then allowed to say anything negative. So what happened is we had to do an intervention with some of the senior leaders, because they wouldn't have difficult conversations because they had to be nice all the time. And I think it's really important to recognize that there is nothing in positive psychology or positive leadership that says you have to be nice, you have to be happy, you have to be this all of the time. It's about how we do that. So I think, in answer to your question, I think it's really lovely that the lady who made this comment, I think it's really lovely that the boss is praising everything. I just hope the boss is also dealing with challenges that come along. And if the praise is genuine, again, remember I said there's a difference between negative communication positively given and positive communication negatively given. If it doesn't come across as genuine, that positive communication can fall just as flat.
Yeah, if I could just add a little bit to that, I think, something even internally with our teams, we actually try and encourage the positive talk to come between team members as well. I don't think it should all be leadership, but it's about creating that climate where everyone feels that when something genuinely good happens, that they should actually talk about that. So yeah, look, it will never work if you're plastic about it, but if you give space to it. You've got that cadence, right? We call it our praise slot in our team meeting, where it's like, so who wants to just give someone a little bit of praise for doing something awesome this week? And that's really genuine because it's spontaneous. Like, oh, well, actually such and such helped me with this, that, and the other. It's having the space for that positivity, not necessarily manufacturing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alison's put a good comment in there. Trump is great at hiding failures. And how's that going? All right. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with, and Anna, this is going to be a little bit of a baby answer to your question, is best examples of people demonstrating leadership. I'm going to share with you this example. I'm going to give you a moment. This was an email I received about 2 months ago. So this is from somebody who is a very senior leader in a global organization. She was head of HR for Pacific Zone. She moved into a commercial and sales operation, which was 60% revenue of the whole business. She was actually told by a few people that she shouldn't get the job because she was a woman, which was really interesting. And by other people, you've come from HR, you don't know about commercial operations. So there were some interesting comments that were made, but thankfully she got the job. And about 6 months in, she got the first engagement scores, which, as you can see there, 46%, not great. Thankfully, she had been on several of the leadership programs that we'd run within the organization, and she had also actually attended our Diploma of Positive Psychology and Wellbeing. And this was her result at the end of the year now. She is head of operations for sales and commercial operations for a very male dominant global organization, 140,000 people. And if you look at that score of 94%, so she heads up the Pacific Zone, that 94%, that is approximately 23% higher than the average in the whole organization. She got the highest scores globally. Now, she gave me some thanks for that, but what I want to share with you is her and a few members of her team in particular really embedded everything they had learned about positive leadership. And it was just beautiful to see these results. So in answer to your question, that is somebody at Schneider Electric here in the Pacific Zone, Anna, and there's a few more that I'm happy to share with you, perhaps offline. And I've just written a little case study for a book chapter on her as well. So I know we've come to the end of our session. So if anybody does have any last questions for Ben or myself, please feel free to shoot them through. I know some of you are commenting that you do have to dash. So if you are having to dash, please note on the screen here are our contact details. You are very welcome to contact myself or Ben if you have any thoughts or questions. And we will, of course, be sending out a follow-up email with the recording and a few other things. And the team at Teamgage are also offering a 30-minute free session to give you an idea of what they're able to offer. So thank you so much for joining us. Ben, thank you to you for being a part of this. Anything you'd like to say as people disappear off into the world?
No, I just really appreciate the time. It was great chatting with you, Sue. I think the content today was fun to talk about. So it's really easy going and some really great comments today. So thank you everyone for taking the time to listen and hope you got something out of it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are in the world.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. See you. Gabrielle's just asked a question. Thank you, Gabrielle. Want to read the studies you cited. Do you have any resource pages I can go to? Some of them will actually be on your diploma login if you want to go there. Email me, Gabrielle, particularly if there's some specific ones that you wanted to reference. And if it's Teamgage relevant, then Ben can send you some bits and pieces. Or if it's particular research studies, I can send them on to you. So thank you for your question. Thanks, everyone. Signing off. See you soon.